The airport was alive with the buzz of travelers, announcements echoing through the terminal as people hurried to make their flights. Near gate C-12, a young man sat quietly, his tall frame folded into a chair that seemed far too small for him. He kept his head low, scrolling through his phone. At 17, life for Barron Trump was anything but normal. Yet, he had perfected the art of staying unnoticed in public. Today, however, his quiet routine was about to take an unexpected and dramatic turn. A gate agent, sharp-eyed and visibly impatient, scanned the area. His gaze stopped on Barron, sitting in the priority boarding section. Something about the boy's calm, almost indifferent demeanor caught his attention. The agent walked over, his presence cutting through the ambient noise. "Excuse me," he said, his voice edged with suspicion. "Are you sure you're in the right boarding group?" Barron looked up, surprised but composed. "Yes, I have a first-class ticket," he replied evenly, his tone polite but firm. His manners didn't seem to ease the agent's skepticism. With a scrutinizing look, the agent demanded, "Let me see your ticket." Barron hesitated for a moment. He'd been in situations like this before, singled out for no apparent reason. But there was something unusually confrontational about this man's tone. Silently, he handed over his boarding pass. The name on the screen stood out immediately: Barron Trump. The agent's eyes lingered on the name, his expression shifting subtly. Instead of stepping back, his tone grew even firmer. "Wait here," he said before walking away. Barron glanced around, sensing the growing attention from nearby passengers. Whispers rippled through the crowd, their curiosity sparked. He could feel his cheeks warm under their stares, but he maintained his composure. Moments later, the agent returned, this time with a supervisor in tow. "There's an issue with your ticket," the supervisor announced, his voice clipped. "You'll need to step aside while we sort this out." "What issue?" Barron asked, frowning. "I booked this ticket weeks ago." "We're handling it, sir. Please move away from the gate," the supervisor said with an air of authority. Reluctantly, Barron complied, stepping aside to lean against a nearby column. He watched as other passengers boarded without issue, their glances and murmurs directed at him. Each passing moment felt heavier, more isolating. Was this because of his last name, or was something else at play? Minutes dragged on. Finally, the supervisor returned, his expression unyielding. "We're unable to verify your identity through the system. Do you have any other form of ID?" Barron's brow furrowed. "My passport is in my carry-on. You haven't even checked it." Caught off guard by Barron's logical response, the supervisor hesitated but quickly recovered. "This isn't just about your ID," he said vaguely. "There are procedures we need to follow." "Procedures?" Barron asked, disbelief creeping into his calm tone. "I've flown through this airport countless times without an issue." The gate agent from earlier interjected. "We've had irregularities lately. This isn't personal." But the look in his eyes told a different story, and Barron wasn't the only one noticing. A woman nearby, holding a toddler on her hip, spoke up. "What's the problem? He's just a kid with a ticket. Let him board." Her words were ignored. The supervisor's focus remained locked on Barron. "You'll need to wait here while we conduct a further review. If you don't comply, we'll have to escalate this." "Escalate?" Barron echoed, his patience wearing thin. "What exactly are you escalating? I haven't done anything wrong." As if on cue, 2 airport security officers appeared. Their presence heightened the tension, drawing even more attention from onlookers. Phones were out, cameras capturing every moment of the unfolding spectacle. "Sir, please come with us," one officer said in a measured tone. Barron grabbed his bag, his frustration evident but controlled. "Fine," he said, following them toward a small room near the gate. The crowd's murmurs followed him like a storm cloud. Inside the sterile room, the officers asked him to sit while they examined his passport. The air felt heavier, colder. One officer flipped through the pages of his passport, while the other stood by, watching him closely. "This is ridiculous," Barron muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "We're just following protocol, son," one of the officers said. That word, protocol, was beginning to sound more like an excuse than a reason. Barron couldn't help but feel the weight of something unspoken hanging in the room. Unbeknownst to him, Someone else was already on her way. In the back seat of a sleek black SUV weaving through Dallas traffic, Melania Trump sat poised, her phone in hand. She had planned a quick trip to surprise her son at the airport. But as her phone buzzed with a flood of text messages and notifications, her calm expression shifted to one of concern. One message stood out. Something's happening with Barron. People are posting videos. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, pulling up a short clip. The video showed her son being escorted away by security, surrounded by onlookers with phones. She replayed the clip, her expression hardening with each pass. "Driver," she said firmly, her voice breaking the silence in the car. "Get me to the airport, now." As the supervisor excused himself to make a call, Melania stood at the door, her sharp gaze assessing every individual in the room. Despite the small confines of the space, her presence was undeniably commanding, and the tension hung heavy in the air. Barron sat at the table, his fingers idly tapping against the surface as he glanced at his mother. Relief flickered across his face, but he maintained his composure, sitting up straighter, as if drawing strength from her mere presence. "Barron," she said softly, stepping closer and placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Her voice, though calm, carried the strength of a mother who would not be trifled with. "Are you all right?" He nodded, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "Yeah, I'm fine. They've just been keeping me here, asking the same questions over and over." Her lips pressed into a firm line as she gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. Turning back to the two officers, her expression hardened once more. "Let me be absolutely clear about one thing," she began, her voice low but seething with authority. "You have not only inconvenienced my son, you have embarrassed him in front of countless onlookers. This isn't about protocol. This is about your lack of respect." One of the officers shifted uncomfortably under her piercing gaze. "Ma'am, we're just trying to follow standard procedures." "Standard procedures?" she interrupted, her tone cutting like a blade. "Don't insult my intelligence. You had his ticket. You had his passport. You had his name. What more do you need? A signed letter from the airline's CEO?" The second officer, clearly less experienced, fumbled for words. "His name. It flagged something in the system, that's all. We didn't know who he was at first." "So, this is about his name," Melania said sharply, cutting him off again. "You saw his last name and decided it was reason enough to single him out. Let me guess, you assumed he didn't belong in first class today?" The silence that followed was deafening. Neither officer dared to respond, their unease evident in the way their gazes darted around the room. Moments later, the door opened again, and the supervisor returned, accompanied by a senior airport official. The new arrival was a man in his late 50s, his expression carefully composed but tinged with apprehension. He extended a hand toward Melania, a forced smile on his face. "I apologize for the misunderstanding," he began, his voice overly polite. Melania didn't take his hand. Instead, she crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "Misunderstanding. Is that what we're calling this now?" The official hesitated, clearly thrown off by her cold reception. "Yes, ma'am. You see, when a name is flagged, it's our duty to conduct further checks. It's nothing personal." "Nothing personal," she echoed, her voice rising for the first time. "You've detained my son in a small, windowless room for over an hour, subjected him to unnecessary scrutiny, and publicly humiliated him. How exactly is that not personal?" The official glanced at the supervisor for support, but the man looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else. Melania took a step closer to the official, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "This isn't just about getting him on the next flight. This is about accountability. Apologies whispered in the shadows won't cut it. I want answers, and I want them out there, in front of everyone who saw this unfold." The official nodded stiffly. "Of course, ma'am. We'll make this right." "You think this is about making it right?" she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "Number. This is about ensuring this never happens again. To my son, or anyone else. People like you need to be reminded that respect isn't optional." The official shifted uncomfortably, but before he could respond, Melania turned to Barron. Her expression softened as she addressed him. "Barron, gather your things. We're leaving this room. Now." He stood, his shoulders squared, and followed her as she strode toward the door. The officers hesitated, but Melania didn't give them a chance to stop her. As they stepped out into the bustling terminal, all eyes turned to them. The murmurs grew louder, the crowd whispering about the scene that had just unfolded. Melania paused, turning to face the crowd. Her gaze swept over them, and she spoke with a calm authority that silenced the onlookers. "Let me make something very clear," she began, her voice ringing out. "No one, no matter their background, name, or appearance, deserves to be treated with anything less than respect. What happened here today is unacceptable, and I will ensure that the people responsible are held accountable." The crowd watched in awe as she turned back to Barron, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Together, they walked toward the nearest gate, leaving behind a room full of officials scrambling to salvage what was left of their reputation. For the passengers who witnessed it all, one thing was certain. Melania Trump was not a woman to be underestimated. "I assure you," the official began, his voice unsteady under Melania's piercing gaze, "we'll be reviewing this incident and taking the appropriate action." "Appropriate action?" Melania repeated, her eyebrow arching as she crossed her arms. "Does that include addressing the staff who escalated this situation without cause? Or reviewing the footage that shows exactly how this began?" The official faltered, visibly uncomfortable. "We can certainly pull up the footage, ma'am." "Then do it," she replied firmly. Her words left no room for hesitation. "And do it now." The small room felt even smaller as everyone watched the official scramble to comply. Minutes later, the supervisor returned, holding a laptop. He placed it on the table and began playing the security footage. The grainy video captured the scene at the gate. Barron, sitting quietly, headphones on, before being approached by the gate agent. The footage revealed how the questions quickly escalated, leading to Barron being singled out and removed from the gate area. Melania stood motionless, her expression unreadable as the video played. When it ended, she turned to the supervisor, her voice icy but calm. "You owe my son a public apology. Now." "Of course," the man stammered, his face pale. "We'll address it immediately." But Melania wasn't finished. "This isn't just about an apology. This is about sending a clear message. No one should endure this kind of treatment, regardless of their name, appearance, or status." The supervisor nodded shakily, gesturing toward the door. He led the way back to the boarding gate, Melania walking beside him with measured steps, Barron following close behind. The terminal was still bustling with activity, but many passengers lingered near the gate. Their curiosity piqued. They watched as Melania, Barron, and the airport staff emerged. Whispers filled the air, phones discreetly raised to record the unfolding drama. The supervisor stepped forward, clearing his throat. His voice wavered, but he pressed on. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a moment to apologize for an incident that occurred earlier today. A misunderstanding involving one of our passengers, Mr. Barron Trump, led to actions that were both unnecessary and inappropriate." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some exchanged surprised glances, while others nodded, recognizing the gravity of the situation. The supervisor hesitated, glancing at Melania, who gave him a subtle nod. He took a deep breath and continued. "I want to make it clear that this young man did absolutely nothing wrong. The incident was entirely due to errors on our part, and we deeply regret the inconvenience and distress caused." Barron stood quietly, his hands in his pockets, his expression neutral. Yet, beneath his calm exterior, he felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel small or unwelcome in a public space. Melania stepped forward, drawing the crowd's attention like a magnet. Her tone was steady, but each word carried immense weight. "Thank you for your words," she began, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "But words are not enough. This isn't just about my son. It's about the principle of treating every individual with respect and dignity, regardless of who they are or where they come from." The terminal fell silent, her words resonating with everyone within earshot. "My son may carry a name that draws attention," she continued, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. But he is also a person, a young man who deserves to be treated fairly, as should every passenger in this airport. Let this be a reminder to all of us. Respect is not earned by status or wealth. It is earned by the humanity we share. Applause erupted, building into a wave of solidarity. Some passengers stood, clapping louder as if to drive home the point. The supervisor, his face flushed with embarrassment, lowered his head. As the applause died down, a woman holding a toddler approached Melania and Barron. Her voice was soft but firm. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what you went through. It wasn't right." Melania's expression softened. "Thank you," she said graciously. "That means a lot." Barron nodded, his voice quiet. "Thank you." Despite the moment of clarity, Melania knew this was only the beginning. It wasn't just about a single apology or a brief statement. This was about sparking a conversation, a movement, that would push for accountability and change. The gate area began to return to normal as Melania and Barron were escorted to the lounge to await the next flight. The airline staff, now visibly on edge, went out of their way to offer refreshments, priority boarding, and other gestures. Melania declined most of them with a polite wave. Barron sat across from her, his hands clasped. After a moment of silence, he spoke. "I didn't expect any of this," he admitted, his voice low. "You handled it well," Melania replied, her voice gentle but firm. "It's not easy to stay calm in moments like that." He shrugged, glancing down. "I've dealt with stuff like this before, just not so publicly." "And that's the problem," she said, leaning forward. "No one should have to get used to being treated unfairly. Not you. Not me. Not anyone." He looked up, her words sinking in. "Do you think this will change anything?" "Maybe not today," she said thoughtfully. "But moments like these add up. People notice. And sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to make others think twice before they act." She pulled out her phone and began typing. Moments later, a tweet appeared on her profile. "Today my son experienced something no one should ever endure, being judged before being understood. Let this serve as a reminder to treat everyone with dignity, no matter their name or background. Respect is universal. Let's do better." The post quickly gained traction, sparking discussions online. Replies poured in, some supportive, others critical, but most echoing her sentiment. Fairness and respect should never be negotiable. When it was finally time to board, Barron and Melania walked to the gate. The staff, noticeably more accommodating, guided them through without issue. As they settled into their seats, Barron put on his headphones, staring out the window. Melania glanced at him and smiled faintly. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had ever been dismissed or treated unfairly. As the plane began its ascent, she closed her eyes, replaying the day's events. It hadn't been easy, but it was necessary. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from moments of adversity, and in those moments, how we respond can inspire others to rise above prejudice and embrace kindness. If this story resonates with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's remind the world that respect is not a privilege, it's a right. Together, we can make a difference, one moment at a time.